Last year, my close friend Jimmy, who's deeply embedded in the East Coast electronic and dance music scene, particularly in New Jersey and New York, invited me to a major event his company was hosting. Jimmy and his team have made remarkable strides in just 2 years, organizing high-profile events at top-tier venues, often the most prominent clubs or party spots in whichever city they're in. They bring in big-name DJs, some nearly famous, to perform. I'm not heavily involved in that world, so I'm not familiar with all the artists they've booked, but I know they've had some major talents. Jimmy and I go back over 20 years. He's been my best friend for most of that time. Because of our friendship, he lets me and our other hometown buddies attend his events for free and hang out in the VIP section with the performers, which is an awesome experience I wish I appreciated more. This particular event was set for the 4th of July weekend at the Jersey Shore, billed as their biggest yet. All our mutual friends were going, and Jimmy asked me to join him early for the setup. I jumped at the chance. My friend Ryan and I rode with Jimmy for the hour-and-a-half drive to the venue, arriving about 4 hours before the doors opened. While Jimmy and his team worked, Ryan and I had little to do, so we started drinking, taking full advantage of the free alcohol provided by the venue. By the time the first DJ took the stage, we were well beyond tipsy. 4th of July weekend seemed like a good excuse for our overindulgence. A few hours later, we were thoroughly intoxicated, probably the drunkest I've been in recent memory. We're grown men and can usually handle our liquor without making fools of ourselves, but our judgment and impulse control were definitely impaired. Still, we were having a blast, at least from what I can recall. As the event wound down, the focus shifted to figuring out how to get home or who to leave with. Jimmy had secured a nearby Airbnb with beds for Ryan and me, so transportation wasn't an issue. However, I was more interested in finding someone to spend the rest of the night with. Ryan and I made our way to the bar and started chatting with two attractive women, who I believe introduced themselves as Gianna and Marcella. My memory gets fuzzy here, but I recall Marcella suggesting we all leave together to keep the party going. Ryan and I didn't object. Gianna handed us drinks, urging us to catch up to their level, even though we'd already consumed an absurd amount of alcohol. It was unusual for women to buy us drinks, but their expensive attire suggested they were well off, so we didn't think much of it. After finishing the drinks, the four of us headed toward the exit. Once outside, Marcella proposed going to her beachfront house nearby, which surprised me. I'd assumed we'd head to our Airbnb, as guys typically host in these situations, but both women insisted her place was far nicer than our inland rental. They weren't wrong, so we agreed. We walked along the beach, talking the whole way. The women seemed intelligent and engaging, discussing topics beyond the usual nightlife nonsense I'm used to with drunk people. I felt a bit embarrassed for being so intoxicated, struggling to articulate myself clearly. Then, I noticed I was feeling drunker than before, but it wasn't the usual drunkenness. My body felt heavy, like it was collapsing under its own weight. My legs seemed weak, almost like cardboard, and moving my limbs, mouth, or even eyes became increasingly difficult. For a moment, my extremities went slightly numb, but the sensation passed quickly, returning me to a more familiar drunken state. We soon reached Marcella's beach house, which was stunning, almost like something a professional athlete would own. Inside, the living room was opulent yet tastefully minimalistic, with sculptures on pedestals that blended seamlessly into the decor. I wish I'd taken a photo, but my mind was elsewhere. Within 15 minutes of arriving, Ryan and Marcella disappeared somewhere in the massive house, leaving me alone with Gianna. She leaned in to kiss me, and that's the last thing I remember before everything went blank. Not the kiss itself, just her leaning in. There's a massive gap in my memory, spanning several hours, which I can't recover no matter how hard I try. I know I didn't pass out because texts sent from my phone prove I was conscious, but I have no recollection of sending them. Unlike typical alcohol-induced blackouts, where I can usually piece together fragments of the night, this was different. I wasn't even as drunk as other times I've blacked out, and Ryan experienced the exact same memory loss at the same time, which feels too precise to be a coincidence. The next thing I recall is waking up with the sun directly overhead, lying in a random set of bushes over an hour away from the event venue. I didn't know my location at the time because my phone, wallet, and keys were gone. Worse, I was wearing someone else's clothes, not Ryan's, but a complete stranger's. The only thing I still had were my shoes, which were soaking wet with the laces removed. My head pounded, and I felt disoriented, like waking up from anesthesia. I lay there for a minute, staring at the sky, trying to make sense of it. Bushes, strangers' clothes, no belongings, wet shoes suggesting I'd been in water, but no smell of salt water or chlorine. Panic set in, not just a hangover, but genuine fear. I had no memory of the past 10 hours, no idea if I'd been in a fight, crashed a car, or been drugged. I stood up, finding no familiar landmarks, just a curving road and trees. Across the street, a few hundred feet away, was a 7-Eleven, the only thing in sight. I headed there and asked the clerk to use his phone, explaining mine had been stolen. He hesitated, but handed it over. I called my sister, the only number I remembered besides my parents, whom I refused to contact. I explained the situation as best I could, and she gave me Ryan's number. I called him repeatedly with no answer, which made me worry he'd experienced the same ordeal. Just as I considered calling the police, Ryan walked into the same 7-Eleven. We stared at each other, then hugged, relieved. His story matched mine almost exactly, confirming our suspicions. We thanked the clerk and called the police. Outside the store, we explained everything to the officers, who initially took us seriously but grew skeptical as our story unfolded. They suggested we'd simply drunk too much and wandered off, questioning our account. I pointed out it was unlikely we'd walked an hour away on foot while blackout drunk, but they didn't appreciate the retort. I gave them my sister's number, and she mentioned tracking my phone via Find My iPhone. To our surprise, it was in a parking lot a few minutes away. The officers drove us there, and we found both our phones on the pavement next to each other. While relieving, this only reinforced their theory that we'd lost our wallets and phones while drunk. They dismissed our request to investigate Marcella's beach house, suggesting we'd misremembered due to alcohol. One officer even said, "It happens more than you think," before handing us their cards and leaving us to find a ride home. Back on my phone, I discovered strange texts sent to various people: Jimmy, my parents, co-workers, and a girl I'd been texting. They sounded like me but made no sense in context. One thanked Jimmy for the event and said we'd crashed at a friend's place. Another told my dad we were safe. Another was a casual message to the girl, implying I was home. None aligned with reality or each other. Jimmy had left numerous missed calls and texts, worried we'd died or something. I called him, and he was relieved, agreeing to pick us up. Ryan and I canceled our cards, oddly in use despite likely being in the women's possession for hours. On the ride home, we obsessed over what happened. We were likely drugged, but the blackout didn't match typical roofie effects, which usually cause sleep, not conscious activity like texting. Why go through such effort to rob us without using our cards? We approached the women, so we weren't targeted. The house might not have been theirs, but taking us there was risky either way. Jimmy suggested exotic drugs, but that didn't explain being driven an hour away in someone else's clothes. We checked for incisions, fearing organ harvesting, but found nothing. Determined for answers, Ryan and I returned to the Jersey Shore to find the house. Walking along the boardwalk, we located it and rang the doorbell. An older man answered, denying any Marcella or young women lived there. I fabricated a story about a girl claiming to own the house, which he found amusing, and we left. The encounter left me with a sick, unsettling feeling, not just fear, but a deep discomfort that something sinister had happened, and we'd never know what. For months, I believed the women were part of something bigger, perhaps planning to kidnap or kill us, but backing out at the last moment. I'll never know, but if anything new surfaces, I'll share it. My name's Ariel, and I live in Georgia, near the Alabama border. A few summers ago, I drove to a small Alabama town for a 4th of July cookout hosted by my college friend Isabel. It was a lively backyard event with paper plates, bootleg fireworks, and tons of food. One of the best nights I'd had in a while. I left around 10 p.m., which, in hindsight, was a mistake. The drive home was over 2 hours, mostly on dark, two-lane back roads lined with dense trees, punctuated only by the occasional farmhouse or small church. With music playing softly, I was still in good spirits, but driving through such isolated areas at night always unnerves me, likely due to my mild fear of the dark. About 30 minutes in, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror, a gray Nissan Altima, its lower half caked in mud, visible under passing streetlights. I didn't think much of it initially, but the car maintained a consistent distance, matching my speed whether I accelerated or slowed down. On these roads, passing is common, so I moved right to signal they could overtake, but they stayed 6 or 7 car lengths behind. To test them, I took a random left onto a small residential road with a few scattered houses. Seconds later, the Altima followed. Convinced they were tailing me, I felt a surge of fear, my heart racing as if I were in immediate danger. Out in the middle of nowhere, I felt helpless, unsure of their intentions. Then, my gas light chimed, indicating a nearly empty tank. My 2012 Corolla is unreliable, sometimes giving me 20 miles, sometimes 10. The nearest 24-hour gas station was over 8 miles away. I considered calling the police, but felt it would be futile in such a remote area, and part of me feared acknowledging the danger would make it more real. When the gas needle hit empty, panic intensified. Every sound felt amplified, the road endless. Miraculously, I spotted the gas station's glow and pulled in sharply, jumping out and running inside without fully closing my door. From the window, I saw the Altima stop at the lot's edge, idling for about 10 seconds before speeding off. I told the clerk what happened, and he offered to call the police. Even after speaking with them, I felt shaken, convinced the driver had malicious intent. Weeks later, a news segment about 2 men wanted for armed robbery, attempted murder, and other crimes in rural Alabama froze me in place. They mentioned a stolen gray Nissan Altima, last seen heading east. The timing, location, and car description matched perfectly. I reported my story to the police, overwhelmed by guilt for not calling them that night. My hesitation might have delayed their capture. I never got an update, but if anything changes, I'll share it.